If you listen to the rhetoric of U.S. government officials, they claim that their war against Iran has gone extremely well. And Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed, falsely, as I'll show today, that supposedly the U.S. has destroyed Iran's military capabilities. Listen to Trump's claims, and then I'll explain why they're wrong.
We are systematically dismantling the regime's ability to threaten America or project power outside of their borders. That means eliminating Iran's navy, which is now absolutely destroyed, hurting their air force and their missile program at levels never seen before, and annihilating their defense industrial base. We've done all of it. Their navy is gone. Their air force is gone. Their missiles are just about used up or beaten. They are begging to make a deal, not me. They're begging to make a deal. And anybody that saw what was happening over there would understand why they want to make a deal.
So that's Trump's narrative. He claims that the U.S. destroyed Iran's military, and he even argued that Iran does not understand that it has been defeated.
Well, they're militarily defeated. In their own minds, maybe they don't know that.
However, here in reality, we have more and more evidence demonstrating that it's actually the U.S. military that has suffered significant damage in this war. Every week, a new report comes out in mainstream U.S. media outlets citing U.S. intelligence officials and top military brass who admit on record that Iran has actually destroyed and seriously damaged the U.S. military bases surrounding it in West Asia, in the so-called Middle East, that it's going to cost tens of billions of dollars to repair these bases if they're ever actually rebuilt. And meanwhile, there are reports showing that Iran's military capabilities have not been destroyed. Iran still has the majority of its missiles in its stockpile, and it has the ability to create more missiles as this war continues. And then finally, the cherry on top is that there are reports that it's actually the U.S. military that is running out of missiles fast, and it will take many years to replace them. So today I'm going to review all of this evidence and show how what Trump is claiming is the exact opposite of reality. So let's start reviewing the evidence. This May, CNN published an investigation in which it revealed that the majority of U.S. military sites in the Middle East, in West Asia, have been damaged by Iran. CNN reported, quote, at least 16 American military sites have been damaged in Iranian strikes, making up the majority of U.S. positions in the Middle East, end quote. CNN published another report at the end of April titled, Repairing Damaged U.S. Military Bases Will Add Billions to Iran War Cost, sources say. This report noted that initially, the Pentagon claimed that in the first 2 months, this war cost $25 billion. However, other internal sources admitted that is an extremely low estimate. It does not include the cost of repairing the extensive damage suffered by U.S. bases in the region. The real estimate is closer to $40 to $50 billion when accounting for the costs of rebuilding U.S. military installations and replacing destroyed assets. Now, this is assuming that those bases are rebuilt in the first place. This report noted that in the first 48 hours of this war, a war of aggression that was launched in a surprise attack by the U.S. on the 28th of February, in the first 2 days, Iran destroyed 9 U.S. military sites in Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, the UAE, and Qatar. Iran destroyed radar systems worth billions of dollars, along with billions of dollars of U.S. aircraft. So those two reports from CNN were just the beginning of the evidence. Like I said, every few days, another report comes out in a major U.S. media outlet admitting the truth that the U.S. government has been obscuring and lying about for weeks now. The Washington Post published another major report this May, noting that Iranian strikes have hit at least 228 structures or pieces of equipment at U.S. military sites since the war began. And the Washington Post wrote, quote, the destruction is far greater than what was previously reported or acknowledged by the U.S. government, end quote. The Washington Post noted that Iran has destroyed U.S. military hangars, barracks, fuel depots, aircraft, and key radar communications and air defense equipment. And it added that, quote, the threat of air attacks rendered some of the U.S. bases in the region too dangerous to staff at normal levels, and commanders moved most of the personnel from these sites out of the range of Iranian fire at the start of the war, end quote. By the way, this was one of the key goals that Iran had. It wanted to expel the U.S. from the dozens of military installations surrounding it in West Asia. And there are now multiple reports in major U.S. media outlets citing top U.S. officials admitting that Iran has accomplished that goal and has expelled most of the U.S. military forces from the region. The New York Times published a similar report in March titled, Iran's Attacks Force U.S. Troops to Work Remotely. This report noted that Iran's attacks on U.S. military bases, which were done in self-defense in response to a U.S. war of aggression, have been, quote, forcing many American troops to relocate to hotels and office spaces throughout the region. Much of the land-based military is, in essence, fighting the war while working remotely, end quote. The New York Times added that thousands of U.S. military forces have been sent to Europe, and the U.S. is using bases in Europe in order to wage this war against Iran. The New York Times added that, quote, many of the 13 military bases in the region used by American troops are all but uninhabitable, end quote. That is an extremely important revelation that directly contradicts what the U.S. government is saying. So thus far, I have reviewed reports published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN, all acknowledging the undeniable reality, the truth at this point, that the U.S. military has suffered significant damage at the hands of Iran. NBC News also published a very similar report in April titled, Iran caused more extensive damage to U.S. military bases than publicly known. Citing U.S. government officials, it acknowledged the same, quote, American military bases and other equipment in the Persian Gulf region suffered extensive damage from Iranian strikes that is far worse than publicly acknowledged and is expected to cost billions of dollars to repair, end quote. So what all of this shows is that Donald Trump lied. He claimed that the war is going swimmingly. Everything is going perfectly well. Iran has been defeated. The U.S. military is triumphant.
Well, they're militarily defeated. In their own minds, maybe they don't know that.
That's all false. It's all disinformation and propaganda to convince people that this war of choice, an unnecessary war of aggression, has been a total success when all of the evidence demonstrates it is the exact opposite. So now that we have very clearly established that, I want to look at another very significant report showing how the U.S. military is using up many of its advanced missiles, and it will take years to replace this military equipment. This was revealed in an article published this April in Fortune magazine titled, The U.S. military may have already used up half of its most expensive missiles, and it could take up to 4 years to rebuild its stockpiles. This article noted that, quote, the U.S. has depleted its store of 7 major types of missiles, intensifying concerns of a near-term risk it will run out of munitions for a future war, end quote. So these are the missiles that the Pentagon is running out of. It has used up 45% of its stockpile of precision strike missiles, 50% of its terminal high-altitude area defense interceptors, those are known as THAAD interceptors, which were largely based in South Korea, although the U.S. has moved some of them to West Asia to wage this war and to protect some of the U.S. allies in the region, like Israel. The U.S. has also used up almost half of its stockpile of Patriot ballistic interceptor missiles, all within the first 7 weeks of the war against Iran. And that's not all. An even more amazing detail reported by Fortune magazine is that the media outlet calculated that just in the first 2 months of this war, the U.S. spent $24 billion on the 7 major munitions used, but the cost of the war against Iran is much, much bigger than that. In fact, a lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School said the cost of the war against Iran is likely to exceed $1 trillion. I repeat, $1 trillion. When you include not only the cost of all of the missiles and other munitions and the planes that were destroyed and other equipment, but also the significant infrastructure damage of the U.S. military bases that were destroyed and the lifetime disability benefits for thousands of veterans who have been significantly injured and in some cases paralyzed because of this totally unnecessary war of aggression launched by Donald Trump. Meanwhile, while the U.S. military has already used up half of many of its missiles and it will take years to replace them, what do you think the situation is like in Iran? Trump and the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, have repeatedly claimed that Iran's missiles have been destroyed. Its military capabilities have been destroyed. But we now know that's a lie. It is simply not true. Because the Washington Post published another major report this May titled, U.S. Intelligence Says Iran Can Outlast Trump's Hormuz Blockade for Months. This article cites a confidential CIA analysis that was delivered to Trump administration policymakers. So Trump and these top U.S. government officials know that they're lying to the public when they claim that Iran's military capabilities have been destroyed, because U.S. intelligence analysts are telling them something completely different, and yet they go out on stage in these press conferences and they lie to the public. In reality, the CIA analysis concluded that Iran can survive the U.S. naval blockade for at least 3 to 4 months before facing more severe economic hardship. This has been reported by the Washington Post. It added that Iran retains significant ballistic missile capabilities despite weeks of intense U.S. and Israeli bombing. And I'm quoting here from the Washington Post, quote, Iran retains about 75% of its pre-war inventories of mobile launchers and about 70% of its pre-war stockpiles of missiles, a U.S. official said, end quote. They also added that the Iranian government has, quote, been able to recover and reopen almost all of its underground storage facilities, repair some damaged missiles, and even assemble some new missiles that were nearly complete when the war began, end quote. So again, I have to repeat that what Donald Trump and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio are all claiming about the war against Iran, it's all lies. They are falsely trying to convince people that this has been such a success, that Iran is defeated, the U.S. is triumphant and it's the greatest military on earth and Iran couldn't do anything. They're all lies. It's simply not true. And this is why even some major U.S. allies in the region are getting cold feet. Like, for instance, Saudi Arabia, which hosts U.S. military bases. And yet, Trump tried to carry out a military operation to forcibly open the Strait of Hormuz. This is the narrow strait off the coast of Iran. And before the U.S. started this war of aggression at the end of February, 20% of globally traded oil passed through this narrow strait on a daily basis. And Trump announced this May he was going to carry out a military operation to forcibly open the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran had closed in self-defense. And yet Saudi Arabia got cold feet, and Saudi Arabia denied the U.S. military access to its airspace in order to carry out this operation. This was a major blow to Trump. And why did Saudi Arabia do this? It's not because Saudi Arabia secretly loves Iran. On the contrary, they are regional rivals. It's because Iran has established a deterrent by causing significant damage to the neighboring countries, especially the Persian Gulf monarchies, like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, like Bahrain. These are countries that host U.S. military bases. The U.S. was using their territory in order to wage this war of aggression against Iran, which is why they were legitimate targets in Iran's acts of self-defense. And tens of billions of dollars worth of energy infrastructure, oil and natural gas infrastructure, has been damaged. And it will take many months, if not years, for previous levels of production to be reached once again. And we're only seeing the very beginning of the economic damage caused by this war. In fact, the Saudi regime is suffering from massive deficits. Saudi Arabia's budget deficit increased by $8.2 billion in the first quarter of 2026. The Saudi regime's deficit has more than tripled since the second quarter of 2025. And this is only the early preliminary data. In the upcoming months, we're going to see that these horrific monarchies, these dictatorships that are propped up by the US in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in the Qatar, in the UAE, they are going to suffer from tens of billions of dollars of losses because of the destruction of infrastructure, because of the loss of tourism revenue. These Persian Gulf monarchies had portrayed themselves as beacons of stability and peace in a turbulent region where the US and Israel are at nonstop war. And we now see how that was just marketing, and it was a lie. It's not true. These regimes host US military bases, and that's why Iran retaliated against them. That illusion has been dispelled, and this is why they're starting to get desperate. This is why the Saudi regime denied the US military access to its bases and airspace. I mean, those bases have already been largely destroyed, but Saudi Arabia simply does not want this war to continue because it knows it will cause even more damage. So all of this adds to the growing mountain of evidence demonstrating that the US empire has lost this war of aggression that Donald Trump launched against Iran. It was totally unnecessary. Trump thought he could carry out regime change. All he had to do was carry out so-called decapitation strikes and eliminate all of the political and military leadership in Tehran, and supposedly the Iranian government would collapse. That has not happened at all. The Iranian government has demonstrated that it is very resilient, and it actually probably has even more popular legitimacy now than it had previously, because many Iranians have rallied behind the flag and defended their country's sovereignty against this war of aggression launched by the world's most powerful empire. And this is why even the Wall Street Journal and the former editor of the Wall Street Journal, Gerard Baker, who's a right-wing former Trump supporter, even he acknowledged that the US is failing in its war against Iran. And some other media outlets have come out very clearly and said that Iran is winning. The Independent, which is a major newspaper in the UK, published an article titled, "Iran is the clear winner as Trump's desperate bid for peace shows he wants out of the war." If you look rationally at the evidence that has come out in the past several weeks as this war has dragged on, that is the conclusion you should come to. Or at the very least, if you think Iran is not winning necessarily, at the very least, the US empire has clearly been losing this war. It has failed to carry out regime change like it did in Syria or Iraq, yet alone state collapse like it carried out in the US-led NATO war in Libya in 2011, which totally destroyed the state and left behind a failed state and anarchy and civil war that is continuing to this day. Those goals have clearly failed. The Iranian government is stronger than ever. Moreover, the evidence that I surveyed today shows how Iran has succeeded in establishing deterrence by demonstrating to the US and Israel that if they attack it again in the future, Tehran can retaliate in self-defense and cause significant damage to US military bases in the region, to Israeli military infrastructure, and to the infrastructure of the Persian Gulf monarchies that support the US and Israel. The US military bases in the region have been destroyed, or at least very significantly damaged. It will cost many billions of dollars to replace that infrastructure if the US even rebuilds these bases. Some of these countries in the region may decide, actually, we don't want to host these US military bases anymore. We thought the US was protecting us. In reality, the US is endangering us by making us a target in these future wars of aggression launched by the US and Israel. All of these details combined have demonstrated clearly that the US empire is losing this war, and Trump is lying when he goes out and claims that everything is going swimmingly and you should just ignore all the evidence and believe what he claims. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I will see you all next time.